Shall we start?
Yes, please.
The fearless not only knows how you're going to react, they're counting on it. You know what I have in my office, Brian?
Hi, I'm Anchita V. Nair, co-founder and COO of Culture, a creative and cultural enterprise that seeks to promote the access, understanding, and experience of India's pluralistic cultural heritage through content, products, and experiences. Welcome to this webinar series of Center for Museums. The pandemic world accelerated digitalization, reviving museums and cultural institutions. Museums and institutions have used a variety of strategies to adapt and migrate into the digital world, including using previously digitized resources, improving social media presence, softwares, and curating new online exhibitions as the educational tool for the audience. In this webinar, Museum Momentum, Digital Exhibitions and Curatorial Experiments, we are going to talk about the role of digital exhibitions in museums. We will also go through the new immersive exhibition, Undivided Identities, Lesser Known Stories of the Partition, and address the role of cultural exchange, oral histories, and curation through a critical lens in contemporary times. Today, we have with us Bhanu Ghalot. She is a historical researcher and a cultural practitioner. Her research and practice is rooted in the study of difficult histories of South Asia. She has been working towards raising awareness of such histories and understanding how and where they are commemorated and what is the public space they occupy. She spent 4 years researching and documenting India's contribution in World War I at the Center for Armed Forces Historical Research. She is currently heading a project on 1947 partition on behalf of Reepi Foundation, British Council, and Glasgow Museum. She is also the curator of the exhibition we will be discussing today. Welcome, Bhanu.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you could join us under this talk series because you're the first curator we've had. So I'm quite excited.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. So let's dive right in.
Right.
The pandemic collectively changed the understanding of the digital for many fields, including the culture and heritage sector. While the concept of virtual museums has been around for 2 decades, using the digital to engage audiences became a necessity. How did you find the experience of virtual exhibitions? What are the elements you find missing from these virtual exhibits?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think I'll answer the second one first. What do you find missing in the virtual exhibition? I think as someone who is curating the exhibition in a physical space, as you enter it, you're almost able to visualize the exhibition. Where is what going to go and how is it going to look? How is the audience going to experience it? But within the virtual space, it almost seems like this limitless, endless space that you have, which is good and bad, because there's so much you can do with it, but yet you have to not overwhelm the audience. So there is a very thin line that you don't cross. So that's definitely one difference. The other is within a physical space, once it's curated, you're able to gauge how the audience is engaging with the exhibition. What is it within the exhibition, that one object or that one art that most audiences stop to look at? What is standing out the most? Within the digital exhibition, that is sometimes difficult to gauge, because the experience of a digital exhibition is often a solo experience, while the physical exhibition is more a community oriented, or a lot of people experiencing it together. But here also we've developed like feedback forms that people often fill and tell us, and we've been receiving feedback on it. But within a physical space, it's definitely easier to gauge the audience experience of it.
But there must be like website, tracking
all of that.
etc.
emotion that you see on the person's face when they are, going through the exhibition. That's something you can't see.
Yeah.
And within a physical space, there's almost you've set out the path in which they're going to view the exhibition. It's very linear.
Right.
This is where you start and this is where you end. But within a digital exhibition, you can go on my on the Readiti website and click wherever you want, start with whatever story.
Correct.
So as the curator and as the team, we had to keep in mind that that's going to happen. So wherever you click on, you still have to understand what the exhibition is. So you have to keep that in mind. Also, you miss the intricacies of the objects, like in a physical museum or in a physical exhibition, you're able to go close, not touch it, but you're able to see the various things that are going on. But within the digital exhibition, that's not possible. However, that was not a problem for us, because the beauty of this exhibition is that it was conceptualized to be a digital exhibition. It's not possible to replicate this in a physical space.
Okay.
So there is also that when you're working with a concept that is made for the digital, so then you don't really correlated with a physical space because it's not made for that. Right. So I think those are some of the differences that do come to mind between these two spaces. As for my experience of working within the virtual space, this was the first time that I was curating something that was digital. And I think the subject itself, Partition, it was close to me, my team. We all had stories of within the family of this history, and it's a history that we are very, very, we feel very close to. So that is something that continuously motivated us. The second is the unique aspect of the exhibition, which when we go through it, I will show you, which got us all very excited because there's so much discourse on partition, but within that, to be able to do something that has not been done as yet, really excites you more and motivates you more. So I think that's what kept us going while we were building this.
Lovely. In fact, that's very interesting that you said, you can start from wherever. So the story has to make sense no matter where you start, whether it's the last paragraph or the first.
Exactly.
Or, I think there are TV shows that are doing that now, but interesting to see a museum exhibition do it. While exploring the immersive digital exhibition, Undivided Identities, Lesser Known Stories of the Partition on Readiti's website, we found it very interesting with how the virtualization, sound, and animated storyboard were weaved together to create an interactive narrative of the exhibition. Yeah. As the curator, what were the challenges you faced during the stages of planning and designing this exhibition? Can you take us through the exhibition as well?
Yeah, okay. I think I'll just briefly touch upon the challenges and then we can, I'll go to the exhibition. I think the first challenge, like I said, we were working with a limitless canvas. There was so much that we could do with it, as much as we had a concept. But I think very beginning, we as a team decided that what's important is not to overwhelm the audience when they come onto this website, to keep it as simple as we can. Because if you think of any websites that we encounter on a daily basis, if there's too much going on that website, we don't know where to click, we get overwhelmed, we are put off and we quickly leave. Yeah. That's not something that we wanted for this exhibition. So one of the ways that we thought we could achieve this is focusing on the colors. And we decided to use colors very, very consciously through the course of the exhibition, instead of just going overboard with it. So when you go through the exhibition, which we'll do now, you'll notice that black is the color throughout the exhibition. And then there is pop of color that comes in the illustrations. Now, what we did is we attached emotions to these colors. So if it's a violent scene, it's often red that you will see. If it's a scene of migration, it's a light blue color that you will often see. What that did is allowed us to bring uniformity in all the 4 stories. No matter what story you go to, there's still that sense of being in the same exhibition and consistency. And it also gave us something to work with and not have to discuss this every time we made a new illustration. Right. So that was one challenge, I think. And the second was as much as the exhibition is digital, the team was also working remotely. So we had never met each other. We had someone working from Goa, I was in Delhi, we had Bangalore, we had Kolkata, we had Glasgow, and we'd all come together to do this. And there were various elements, as you mentioned, within the exhibition. So you have animation, you have sound, you have illustrations, and you have the narrative and the storytelling. All of this had to come together to look like it's part of one exhibition. So I think the challenge was to ensure at every step that that's happening.
Right.
So I think with that, I'll take you to the exhibition.
Sure.
I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So that's a basic trigger warning. So we have 4 stories within the exhibition. One is originating in Hyderabad, Sindh. We have one originating in Khulna, erstwhile East Bengal, and we have 2 from Punjab, one in Firozpur and one in Jalandhar. So I'm going to take you to, let's go to the first one.
January 1948.
The audio is not.
Hastily divided along
sorry.
religious lines to create the independent states of India and Pakistan.
That's what.
It means that the province of Sindh now belongs to the newly formed.
So you can't hear it?
Once you mute it, we can't hear it. Once you mute it. Yeah.
Okay.
Now it's okay.
Dominion of Pakistan. According to the new border that has been drawn, Sindh is now bounded by the Indian states of Gujarat and Rajasthan to the east, and Pakistani provinces of Punjab and Balochistan to the north. The history of Sindh rests on a number of Muslim invasions, which led to a heavy Islamic influence in the region, with the Sindhi Hindu community remaining a minority. Just like the rest of the country, the province of Sindh too is in a state of unrest and turmoil. The news of partition and the devastating violence in Punjab and Bengal has led to fears and insecurities in the Sindhi Hindu community. These fears reached their peak after the Karachi riots of 6 January 1948, leading to widespread panic. The community began to do what it had feared the most: leave their homes in search of safety elsewhere. It's against this backdrop that the story of Devi Das and his family's migration to India in 1948 takes place.
So we have similar introductory videos for each of the 4 storylines, and that's basically to establish a last trigger for why this family is deciding to move, because usually families did have that very, very last trigger. Then you arrive on the story. It'll be difficult to read everything because this is really a solo experience, but I'll just take you through it briefly.
Yeah.
This is the first scene of the story. So at the end of each scene, you have to decide on behalf of the family what they should do. And that is what the unique experience of this exhibition is. So once you go through the scene and you understand what's happening, you have to, now in this scene, you need to decide if Devi Das should leave or stay because he has rioting mobs knocking on his door. And once you click on whatever, the story will proceed further and will have consequences based on all the decisions that you make. And at every stages within each of the stories, these decisions need to be made. So the audience is really put in the shoes of partition refugees through this act of decision making. And at crucial stages within each of these stories, we have something called the fact files.
Okay.
which give you added information on what is going on in the story. So this gives you context of Sindh.
Okay.
What these fact files do is allow audiences to understand how the politics of the time was impacting lives of ordinary people, which is something that we often forget when we're discussing difficult histories.
Right.
So these fact files allow you to do that. First, second, because it's been built as an educational resource, it gives added information to students on what was going on other than just the narrative.
Right.
So just briefly, I'm going to click one of the. So let's click on leave. Once you click on leave, you have to decide if the family should take all valuables or bare minimum. So if we click on bare minimum, you can see here, he is hiding some of his valuable items in his backyard, which is something that people often did because they believe that they're going to
come back. Right.
Yeah,
right.
so he's digging a hole and he's hiding it there. He hides some in the charpai, the leg of the charpai. So, and then you need to decide how he travels. So like that, we have 4 such stories which truly need to be experienced on your own when you have the time. So I'm going to stop sharing here. But what I briefly also want to do here, unless you have a question, is to also show you the back end of the exhibition. Because when you're building a digital exhibition, how did these elements come together?
Right.
Because we weren't working on the website as such. So I think I briefly want to also show that.
Yeah.
So we use something called Miro to really put the exhibition together. So you can see it's all cluttered. We have all our team was always working on it. There were many cursors moving on it all day. And I think the team is more attached to this Miro board than anything else within the exhibition. Yeah. So this is how we mapped the stories. Because it's decision-making tree, so you have to have the decisions here. If I go in, and really use like different shapes so that the designers and everybody know that that's a decision and that's a question. So each of the story was mapped out like this, and then you of course have sketches of the illustrations, and then you have the final illustrations on which we would comment, and then it would go on the website. So I think this Miro board is as crucial a part of the exhibition as the actual exhibition itself. We also put all our additional research, etc., here for the design team to go through it so that there is utmost authenticity in what we are saying within the exhibition.
So how did you decide on these 4 stories? What was the thought process?
Right. So I think because Ririti has already done a lot of research on the impact of partition in Bangalore and particularly on the Sindhi community, we had first-hand oral history interviews and primary resources to use. So we were sure that one of those stories had to be Sindh. But the other things that we wanted to show different regions and how it was impacting different regions. But also because it's for students, Punjab and Bengal were important because that's what they're going to constantly confront in their textbooks as well when they're talking about partition. So those were some of the reasons on how we decided the stories. But of the Sindh and the East Bengal stories are oral history interviews that we went through, a lot of them, to build this fictionalized narrative. But the other 2 stories are stories of 2 of our researchers from Glasgow, their family's experience of partition, and they sort of interviewed their family and then built this narrative. Wow. So it just happened to be that both were from Punjab, but the 4th story, the Firozpur story, is a migration from India to Pakistan. That's also something that we had to keep in mind, that as much as we show migration from Pakistan to India, we also show migration from India to Pakistan. So there's just so much to the history, so vast, and there are so many boxes you want to tick. Also in terms of transportation. Okay, if in one story the family is taking a train, In another story, how do we talk about a lot of people who walked in these caravans? That needs to come in. Experiences of people who were not so privileged, that needs to come in. Experiences of women needs to come in. So a lot of those things had to be kept in mind as well when you were building this.
Yeah. Curatorial research instigates critical questions to produce knowledge and experience in public spaces. In the Undivided Identities, the identities that have been showcased impact today's time. How has the criticality of the subject and its difficult history in this exhibition played an important role in curating?
I think part of it I just answered in the last question, just maintaining a lot of these different narratives that exist for this history and trying to ensure that we don't miss something. It's still like we don't have within the exhibition, we don't have a migration story from Kashmir or the Northeast, but research on that is now beginning to pick up. And there's always that's also the beauty of the digital. There's always the possibility to add more, to make the exhibition vast. But I think apart from that, if you look at the term difficult history, what does it mean? It means it looks at traumatic histories that deal with violence and often raise questions of identity and belonging. But with partition, it's not just a difficult history, it's also a contentious history. Right. If you look at, there is still no consensus amongst the stakeholders or the stalwarts of this history on who was responsible for the violence that occurred post 15th August. For the British, it was the administrative failures of the politicians here that led to that violence. For Pakistan, it was the camaraderie between India and Britain that led to that violence. For India, it was the rushed decision of the British that led to that violence. There is nobody wants to take responsibility for it. How do you speak of this history so we've all built our own narratives. There is and each of us have a nationalistic narrative for this history. Right. But what happens when you're building a digital exhibition of the kind that we have, which needs to cater to South Asia, which needs to cater to India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, your challenge then is to bring an aspect of this history that cuts across these nationalistic narratives. And I think for this exhibition, a lot of people, cultural practitioners who are working with this history, one of the ways you're able to do this is by focusing on the oral history and memories of people. Because what that does is it allows us to, the biggest contention for partition is that the victims were the perpetrators of this violence, that the lines between the victim and perpetrator is very blurred. Right. So when you're listening to oral history interviews, if it's a Hindu family sharing their experience, within that oral history, for that moment, they are the victims and the people who did the violence are the perpetrators. You move on to the next one, it's a Muslim family, that relationship changes. By the time you hear 6, 7, 8, you will realize that there is this was not a pogrom, this was riots, like everybody was violent towards each other. So that is something that we wanted to ensure comes out in this exhibition, that we don't isolate any one community and show them as the victim, because that's not the reality of this history. Other than that, this is also a history in academic terms. In academia, there's a term called negative self-history, which is a history that that speaks of the kind of violence your own nation and your own people have done to themselves. So how do you confront that kind of history? How do you reconcile with a past that is so traumatic and it's your own people who did that? So when you're building and when you're working with a subject of that nature, that is also something that you need to keep in mind. A layer to that is we were building this for students. So the sensitivity of the language needed to be kept in mind. Where do we place the trigger warning needed to be kept in mind. So we worked with teachers to be able to understand and build that while remaining extremely true and authentic to this history. You cannot sanitize this history. You cannot not speak of the kind of horrific incidents that occurred. Right. But how do you say it and what kind of language you use is something that certainly needed to be worked through.
The history of the 1947 partition has been active in recent years, raising awareness and igniting a conversation in public space. There are numerous projects and initiatives focusing on the history of the 1947 partition. How do you think we have arrived at this large-scale museumization of partition, and how do you interpret this cultural landscape?
I think when this truly began is with Urvashi Bhutalia's book in the 1990s, The Other Side of Silence, when for the first time we were able to look at partition from a different lens, to shift our gaze on the narrative of partition. Like she points out in the book, until that point, it was Gandhi, Nehru, Jinnah, and the freedom struggle, which is still our nationalist narrative of this history.
Right.
Which is something that the schools also focus on. But her history brought the people's experience and oral history and memories to the fore. From there, you have Ritu Menon and Kamala Bhasin's book that spoke of women's experiences of partition. I think that sort of began the discourse then in the 1990s. Then with 2010, with the 1947 Partition Archives and the kind of the amount of oral history interviews that they've managed to, conduct and archive since then, further sensitized us to the fact that we can speak about this history, no matter how sensitive it is, because it's not just sensitive within our nation, it also impacts transnational relations within South Asia and our relationships with Pakistan and Bangladesh. So it's a history that continues to have, it's very, very relevant till date, like you mentioned in your question. So I think the 1947 Partition Archive allowed us as a community to at least have a discourse on it. It also made the survivors comfortable with breaking that culture of silence that Urvashi Bhutalia speaks of, to be able to feel comfortable to share their experience. And it's, I think, through efforts of that nature that we were able to arrive at a point where we were okay with dedicating a physical museum to this history, which is the Partition Museum, which opened in 2017, which I think was 70 years or so after the occurrence of this history. And this is a history the foundation of our nation is built on, modern foundation. So I think it's all of these many things. And now with all this archive built and with the generation of partition survivors slowly fading, our next challenge is to come up with ideas on how we can utilize this archive, how we can experiment with this archive to bring this history for the generation that doesn't really know it, to continue to make this history engaging and interesting for that generation. And I think this exhibition and projects like Project Dastan stand at that intersection where we are being experimental with all the plethora of information that we've managed to gather for this history. But I think amidst all of this, there is still an absence of criticality in the memorialization of 47 partition, because what we've done is we are looking at this subject in isolation. Mm-hmm. We only speak about partition when we are talking about partition. We do not correlate it to similar histories of ethnic violence that have occurred in independent India since then, whether that is the Gujarat riots of 2002, the Sikh riots in 1984, the riots that followed the demolition of Babri Masjid. These are very, very sensitive subjects, and it's understandable that it's difficult to bring them up. But I think there are subtle ways of correlating it, because a role of a museum is also to leave audiences with lingering questions on things that are relevant today, on how it's impacting us today. But when we look at this history in isolation, we somehow miss that criticality, and which is a bridge that I think practitioners need to come together to try to fulfill. We don't have to be radical and have activism attached to it. That's not what I'm suggesting, but at least we need to find subtle ways to start correlating these histories, because they are the same.
Right. No, I absolutely love the 1947 archive initiative, because it's also volunteer driven. So it's actually there is so involvement of so many people with communities sort of the different generations being connected. You talk to your grandparent about their experience, and that's something that we haven't really seen museums do, right? I mean, they don't really utilize the rich volunteer base that they can around the community. So I think that it's fantastic what they do. And it's really surprising how many exhibitions have actually started taking up partition stories. Even there was one exhibition in Delhi Metro, one of the metro stations that I saw, and it was incredible. It was about women and their stories. So in a metro station, to have such a sensitive topic being talked about, that was something incredible to me, and that is a new change which really needs to come about, and that's and I hope it's happening. So yeah,
I think it is. And also with the 1947 Partition Archive, what's beautiful is, because it's functioning, its base is in the US, it has access to stories in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and anywhere else that we may have migrated. Had this project been started in either of the South Asian countries involved in this history, it would have been very difficult to get the other side. Yeah. So they are really able to build like a holistic perspective. And the thing in the metro station, I think it's a double-edged sword. We are able to have it in the metro station because we look at this history in isolation. Once we start to correlate it, it'll become too sensitive. But then that is the correlation is also important. So we just need to find that
right balance,
that sweet balance where we can do both.
Right. In this generation of digital communication, museums are focusing on the needs of the young visitors and students by educating and involving them in exhibition activities and storytelling. Today's approach is different, where technology makes a subject interesting, museums implement visual aids to showcase, and it has increased the essence of understanding. Could you share how is undivided identities impacting students, like you already mentioned?
Right. So I think this project was built to engage the young people with this history. That was the core idea for this exhibition, apart from the conceptualization, the concept of it. And when we knew our core audience, it made us easier to then, okay, how are we going to build this? The game experience of it has been done primarily keeping them in mind, because so that they are able to come and engage with it more holistically. How we did it is we had apprenticeships. So we had 4 young people, South Asians in India, 2 researchers and 2 creative interns. And we had 4 young South Asians in the UK, again, 2 researchers and 2 creative interns. And it was the team of these 8 young people who were really driving this project, who were at every stage telling us, this is not going to work, that's going to work. One of them is the sound designer of this exhibition. So every sound that you go through within the exhibition, which is such an important part of the exhibition, is built by one of these creative interns. So it's through discussions and discourses through the young people that we built the resource, because it's being built for them. Also, at crucial stages, we worked with teachers throughout the building of the exhibition to understand from them what's working and what's not working, what sort of language to use, etc. We also had 4 partner schools, 2 in India, 1 in Pakistan, and 1 in Bangladesh. And we worked with the students of these partner schools we held oral history workshops with them. We encouraged them to interview partition survivors in their community. They conducted these oral history interviews and submitted it as part of the project to us. And a lot of the nuances in the story, because it's one thing to build a partition story, but it's so lies in the nuances of Devidas digging his backyard to hide his gold, because that emotes the fact that he genuinely believes he's coming back. Yeah. Or a family traveling on a train and hiding their money in the sole of their shoes. Those are the nuances of this migration experience. And that can only come through people who went through it. It cannot come in academic papers and research. It can only come through oral history. So when they submitted these oral histories, and if we were building a narrative that was focused on what became Bangladesh, then we would hear their oral history interviews and pick on these nuances, because submitted it to us. And now what we've done is that we've archived the oral history interviews on a learning resource that we are going to launch soon, which has these oral history interviews, other oral history interviews that Riti has conducted, and all the research that we unearthed through the process of building this exhibition is all there for the public to go through. We also have research, free lesson plans for teachers, which they can pull up and start to teach this history using alternative methods and material culture and oral histories and literature and poetry, because there are so many ways to teach this history beyond the textbook. Yeah. So those are some of the ways. The other most crucial aspect of this project was, which is the second phase of this project, which is to use this exhibition to conduct workshops with school students, which is something that we are currently doing with schools in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And we are creating a teacher's toolkit for UK, because they have a module called Empire and Migration. But unfortunately, partition is not taught under that module. So we're giving them resources and ways in which they can include partition as well within this larger module of Empire and Migration, so that the UK students as well can understand this history and correlate it with whatever else that they're learning in their class. And I think our focus is actually on the alternative resources other than the exhibition itself, to continue to engage students in all these through all these ways.
That sounds brilliant. How has the reception been from the student community so far?
They've of course really liked it, and they like the immersive nature of it. They like the illustration. So everything that we were trying to do has been received well by them, because we also had the students who were conducting oral history interviews were also the students who tested the exhibition before we launched it. So they already gave us our feedback, what's not working. Sometimes they feel that the narrative is too long, but you have to read. You know, you have to inculcate that habit, so we can't cut that down. So other than that, they seem to really immerse themselves in it. What we wanted, we are able to get with all the feedback that we've received. And through workshops, they're able to understand this history, things that they just didn't know. Because sometimes we sit in silos and we think, what I know about partition, everybody knows about partition, but they don't know. They don't know how. They know it was violent, but what does that violence look like? So suddenly, when you hear Amrita Preetham's poetry, that violence just comes. You are so moved if you hear it in amalgamation with pictures, or Faiz Ahmed Faiz, or. And the other thing that always comes up when I talk about the lines between the victim and the perpetrator being blurry in these workshops, and something that they've also mentioned in their feedback form, if they're watching this with their own biases and their own, how they've learned about this history. So if it's a Hindu, someone who comes from a Hindu background, for them, Hindus were the victim. If it's a Muslim, for them, if we're taking a workshop in Pakistan, then for them, Muslims were the perpetrators. So our aim has been that Muslims were the victims. So our aim has been that students understand that that's not true. And we are able to achieve that. And a lot of that they mention in their feedback as well. Oh, I thought only Hindus were being attacked. But I understand that that's not true now. So sometimes we think everybody knows it, but they don't.
That's actually very interesting. And generally, while you target a particular group of audience, sometimes it's the unexpected audience group which responds well. Has that happened, or it's mostly been students who have received the exhibition?
Mostly it's been students in my case, or university students. So then with university students, the discussion becomes more about objects and how objects are tied in with our identity, and the whole discussion about personal identity and collective identity and politics of identity. So we sort of keep partition as the foundation to explore all these themes, to also explore social life of objects and the cultural biographies of objects and the evolving trajectories of objects. Because what Aanchal Malhotra's project shows us is how the meaning of this object is continuously evolving from the time that family carried it to the time they brought it here, then preserved it, and now it's in the public space. Its meaning has continuously been changing.
And the meaning for the next generation in the family. And, it's very interesting. Regardless of location and geographical boundaries, has online presence decreased the rawness and tangibility of going to museums and institutions and attending an exhibition?
I don't know how to answer that as like a generalized blanket statement. I can only go by what I've seen around me and my own experience of it. I don't think it has, because I think people are still, what the digital is doing is that it's made it convenient. So if you can't physically go to the exhibition, you're happy to have access to it through the digital. So if I think of my own, if I put myself in that place, MAP in Bangalore, they're soon going to open. I don't think I'm going to be able to visit, but there's so much I already know about their collection, how the museum is going to be, what's happening, what kind of discourses do they go, because of the digital presence that they have. The other is Constructivist Museum in Ahmedabad. I would love to visit it, but I've not had the time, but I still regularly engage with what is happening in the museum because of access to the digital and, their virtual exhibitions and things like that. So I think where it's convenient, people still would prefer to go to the museum, but where it's not convenient is when we fall back on the digital to sort of engage with it. But there's still that lack of what we keep saying, museum going culture in India. So it's really difficult to gauge.
Right. I mean, does that increase your work as a curator, that every time you design a physical exhibition, you will also have to design something for the digital space? And, now that...
Absolutely. How can you, no one's going to come to see it if you don't have that. Like, people learn about things through the digital now. Now you have the Partition Museum, they've got the Project Dastan to Delhi, right? And they've been, you and I wouldn't know that if we weren't on Instagram and if we weren't, so that's become important to do, I think.
So this is very important for people who are coming into the sector now, and especially for institutions which are teaching these museum professionals and people who are going to curate future exhibitions. I don't know if they've already caught up with the changing times and trends.
I think they're trying, but I'm just thinking of the state and the government museums. They're really trying, but I think they're still stuck in their bureaucracy and hegemonic ways of working. And that's not how you do digital marketing, or that's not how you use the digital. It's free flowing. You have to understand what people are relating with, right? So I think that's there. But MAP has been doing a great job.
As we've already discussed, digital has become an important space for museums worldwide. What do you think the space will look like for South Asia specifically?
So I think over here, if we just look at the term digital museums, it's often seen as this creative binary space that takes the museum to the people, as well as a space that uses to bring people to the museum. So we're using the digital as that. Right. But I think this is, it's almost become an extension of the physical museum. But it's a very Western understanding of the term digital museums. And I don't think it fits in within the South Asian context, because what we are intentionally or unintentionally doing is decolonizing and decentralizing this very understanding of the term digital museums. Because over here, I was reading a paper and the author stated that in the unstructured space of the internet, we have a permanent memorial to South Asian history. And what she was referring to was the innumerable projects that we engage with on Instagram, on WordPress, whether that is Brown History, 1947 Partition Archive, Museum of Material Memory, Indian Memory Project, Humans of Bombay, India Love Project. There's just, I think all of that also fits into this digital cultural landscape that we speak of today. Because what's happening in this space is, it's not just a virtual space. I look at it as an alternative space, because a virtual space often coexists with a functioning model of a physical museum. But an alternative space here is a space that brings into discussion narratives and histories that are completely negated in the physical space, because either they are too sensitive or they are too complicated. They stand at a risk of, offending one community or the other. And it's all these histories that we don't speak of in the physical space. We have brought it into this through these unstructured projects into the digital space, and have sort of gained agency over that. This is my history. I'm going to tell it. This is my narrative. So suddenly we have this South Asian narrative that is emerging. Whether that speaks of collective identity or not, we can discuss that, but at least it's there. And within this space, people are the curators of these spaces. And representation, identity, subaltern voices, diasporic voices, all of this is continuously being negotiated in this space.
Right.
And memory and oral history is continuously being performed within this space, which we don't see elsewhere. So I think we need to broaden our understanding of the digital museum. Just because Brown History or Indian Memory Project doesn't call themselves a museum doesn't mean they aren't bringing that discourse that is very relevant to a museum.
Right.
And they've also been, slowly we're starting to talk about it, and they're being referred to as digital archives or communal archives. But of course, they're structured and unstructured and things like that. But I think that's, apart from the Western understanding, this is also one understanding that is very relevant to South Asia and other developing nations, which we need to embrace more when we speak about the digital cultural landscape.
Right, absolutely. It has really democratized the entire curatorial experience, right? Like, it's not just one expert who's telling you a story. It's just everyone contributing to the actual story and understanding of the different perspectives. It's incredible.
And that's what people relate to, right? Because they see themselves in that story. Yeah. And then they want to tell their own story, and that process just continues. So I think, and it's also then a constructivist space where the audience and the public stands at the center of it. Unlike the physical museum, at least here, a large majority of it, of course, we have exceptions, it's still a colonial authoritative space that is like, I know this history, you come, I will tell you. But within the digital cultural landscape, that's not there. We're always like, okay, you tell me. We're always discussing.
Yeah. With a combination of issues, including design, delivery method, and visitors' needs and expectations, one of the biggest challenges is visitor engagement, delivery, and authenticity. How can we use storytelling, memories, and oral history in museums to inspire our visitors?
I think one way is already that we've discussed. We are already doing that. We're just doing it in a space where we are still stuck in that Western understanding of a museum. So we don't want to embrace that space as a place where all of this is already happening. But within the museum, I'm not sure as yet how we can do it, because the methodology of oral history is also new for us. It's not formalized. We are using it still in informal settings. And other than the 1947 Partition Archive, there's no large-scale history for which we are starting to use this as a very, very legitimate methodology to understand the past. So unless that happens, how can we bring more narratives into the museum? We first need to embrace and understand that oral history is important. And I only know how others have done it. Like if we think of the 9/11 museum, you can go and pick up the phone there and you can hear all the calls that were made to emergency services on that day, and you're immediately transported to that time. Similarly, when you listen to, and I think even when you listen to partition oral history.
ଖଣ୍ଡେ କଣ ଦେଖିଲେ ଆଜି ସେପଟକୁ ଦେଖିଲା ବେଳକୁ ଲାଞ୍ଜଟେ ସେପଟକୁ ଓଳିଛି.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're almost able, you are with the person, you're almost on that train, you're almost, on 15th August, whatever they're saying, you're with them. Another very important aspect of oral history is that it's a bottom to top approach of learning history. It's people's history, people's narrative. It gives you the space to do that. Yeah. So I unfortunately don't have an answer on how we can use it within the museum, but yeah, it's important, and we are certainly able to relate with it more the more we see around us. So
I would like to now invite the audience, if they have any questions, please put them in our chat box, and we shall try and answer them. And similarly, if people who are watching on Facebook, please put them in the comments, and we shall talk about it. So how long was the whole project? Like, when did you start working on the exhibition? And
we put the team together in May. Of course, we were working on it before that, but the core team came together, including the research interns and everything, in May last year. Oh. And we launched the exhibition in October that year. So
that's not that long. I mean,
I think that's because we had already conceptualized and done the heavy lifting of it in the planning stage.
Okay.
And once that's discussed and roles are divided and everyone knows what they're doing, then you're following that to create this. But there's still, it was overwhelming.
Yeah, I'm sure it must have been intense, because that's really, really a short duration of time to put together such an extensive sort of exhibition.
But like I said, everybody was so motivated to work on it. It didn't feel like, it didn't feel like work. It felt really, really exciting to bring something so unique for a subject that's so talked about.
Right. So we have a question. Jahan asks, hi Bhanu, since you mentioned there are teachers' toolkits available for the UK, is there any such implementation in India apart from workshops?
Yeah, so we of course have the 3 free lesson plans on the learning resource that we'll be launching very, very soon. It should be live next week. And other than that, we are also doing teacher training workshops where we understand from teachers how this subject is taught in classrooms and what is it that they need more for this subject. And we sort of sit and work that out with teachers in these teacher training workshops. So,
how has the response been from the teachers, like people who have taught this subject for so long, to have an additional a tool and a different approach to teaching the subject?
I mean, they're thrilled to have it because it gives them something beyond what they've been teaching year on year in their textbooks. It also brings in discussions that the textbook can't, on identities, on belonging, on migration, on displacement, grief, loss. These are all aspects of this history that the textbook is not going to tell you. So you need something of this nature. And the beauty is, you are really not sitting, you're not telling the student, oh, there was so much grief. They are going through the exhibition and arriving at their own understanding of how horrific or how traumatic this event was for ordinary people. So I think that's been exciting for teachers and for us.
So the workshops that you're conducting, is it for a particular age group of students? I mean,
from 7th grade onwards.
Okay.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
So till when is the exhibition going to be live, or is it going to be a permanent sort of?
For now, it's certainly there till October this year. Okay. But we are thinking, we are trying to find ways where we can keep it on and extend it, and hopefully be able to add more to it, because there's so many more stories to tell.
Absolutely. Yeah. And is there any way in which a visitor can contribute, or, are you thinking of adding that?
Once we know for sure, we're going to be able to, we're going to add more stories to it. So that is when we can start thinking of what sort of contributions we need and how to ask for that contribution from the audience, from the people. How can we do this slightly differently than what we've already done and yet remain uniform and consistent?
Right.
So, but right now we don't know this. We're just talking about it. We're still taking in all the feedback that we're getting for this exhibition. So,
and if somebody asked you to translate it to a physical exhibition, do you think you will want to do it at all?
Actually, we've already been getting some requests to be able to do it. So we are constantly thinking of ways that, we can, how do we replicate this in the physical space? And I feel like it is possible. It will hamper the experience a little because, like I said, it's made for the laptop or the phone and as a solo experience. But it is certainly possible to do that. And that is also something we are thinking about constantly, because we've got one or two requests on bringing this to the physical space. So, yeah, it's possible.
Okay, let's see if we are able to see the exhibition soon in a physical space. I would definitely come, and
it'll be great if you could share the link. I'm just going to put the link of the exhibition. If you could share it, I don't know, on Facebook, in this chat box, people have access to it.
We'll definitely do it on all our, descriptions, etc. So
just for now, putting it here.
More people, joining the exhibition and going through it. Thank you so much, Bhanu, for talking to us, taking time out to talk to us, and hopefully through our YouTube video and Facebook Live, etc., we'll have more people talking about the exhibition and the stories, etc.
Thank you so much. It's always fun to have discussions of this nature. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.